the local rock scene was taking off, and I started writing about all the local bands because I loved the music, and there were lots of clubs. And I think it was Byrne Elliott and the Fenmen were a local band. And then there was a band called the Pretty Things, and then the Rolling Stones from Dartford. So I was writing about all of these local groups. The first time I saw the Stones was 1963, and they were playing in a tent at the Richmond Jazz Festival, and right at the back of the festival, not even on the main stage. And the main stage featured bands like Bilk, who were playing really nice traditional jazz, and hundreds of people were watching him. And then suddenly you heard this announcement: the Rolling Stones are going to play in a few minutes, and the whole audience turned around and ran away from Bilk, ran to the back and packed into this tent, and there we saw the Stones playing live. Well, first time I'd seen them live, and it was one of those historic moments. You realise that trad jazz died at that moment, and R&B took off. And in fact, the compere, Bill Carey, who was a Canadian guy, shouted this announcement: this has been rhythm and blues. This is the Rolling Stones, 1963. It's like a historic moment, the big breakthrough. After that, they weren't playing in tents anymore. They were out on the road and doing cinemas and theatres. And after about 3 or 4 years, people kept saying to me, "Oh, you like writing about all these bands, you should work for a music paper." So I wrote off to Melody Maker, and they said, yes, the letter writer, because I'd written lots of letters, abusive letters to the readers' column. And so I got an interview at the MM, and that was 1964. Actually, I did write to the NME first because they were advertising a vacancy, and they wrote back and said, "Sorry, I think it was already taken," so I missed that one. But I was glad I got the Melody Maker. They had a vacancy too, somebody was leaving. They didn't have many young pop writers then, very few. They're all older writers who brought up in jazz and dance bands, as Melody Makers, as you know, originally started as a jazz and dance band musicians' paper. So they desperately needed somebody to write about all these groups. So having written articles about the Stones and been to see them play at one of their early gigs, that helped a lot. So I kept for years, I found in the garage recently, some of my early stories that I wrote, because I was quite pleased and excited about doing these stories, and they were on slips of paper. It wasn't a full A4 sheet. You had a little half, like a quarter slip, and you used carbon paper as well, of course, and you'd have to write, I think, at least there had to be at least one carbon copy. And of course, if you made a mistake, you could just tear it up and do it again. So that's why it was all in short slips, and for the subs to sub it as well. And the maximum, say, for a live review would be about 300 words, and a feature would be about, if you're lucky, 1,000 words. And you had to compress everything, and you had to have a very strong introduction and an angle. You couldn't just waffle away and transcribe a tape. You weren't allowed to do that. In fact, we didn't have any tape recorders at all. All the interviews had to be with notebooks. I had to type at speed with people breathing down your neck, like the editor or the news editor. My first day was a nightmare, I have to tell you, on Melody Maker, because I was used to the jolly atmosphere on the local paper. It was Newsday, and on a Monday, and you had to do all the news stories, which meant that you had to ring everybody up, get quotes from the bands and the managers and the PRs, and write it very, very quickly. And they were screaming down your neck if you hadn't got it done on time. You know, like for example, what's the Beatles' new single going to be? Can you get a quote from John Lennon? Well, I don't know where he is. He's at Heathrow Airport. He's going off to America. Ring the airport and page him over the tannoy. So he had to do stuff like that, you know, and get a quote. So the first day was a nightmare compared to my happy days on the Kentish Times, and I went out for a drink with one of the staff afterwards in the pub, and he started being very pessimistic and saying, "Well, you know the music business is finished, don't you? Melody Maker's probably going to close. Circulation is terrible. It's only about 15,000 a week, and you come at a really bad time. It'll all be over soon." I think he was winding me up. So I was so disheartened after this terrible day of hard work and drinking too much and smoking too much. I was promptly sick in Fleet Street outside the office, and went home and thought, do I want to go back there? I thought, well, I've signed the contract and I can't give up now. So I went back the next day, Tuesday. Totally different vibe. All the people that were shouting at me had disappeared because they were all at the printers, and I just sat there and relaxed for a day, and it was just very jolly. And Wednesday was a planning meeting, and I realised it's only one day a week that was really hard work. So after that, I stayed, having thought I'd leave after the first day, I stayed for 14 or 15 years, I think it was. So, and every day was exciting, I have to tell you. Yeah. It was good because people were keen to write about that. Everybody was following, you know, they were involved in the music and they wanted to champion their particular artists, or whoever it was. In my case, it might be the Yardbirds or Georgie Fame or Zoot Money or The Who later on, because we thought these were the new upcoming groups, so you'd want to see them on the cover. But you had to convince the editor, who'd want to have somebody on the cover that's going to sell lots of copies.